Welcome to Talking Legal with Templars. I am Oyeyemi Aderibigbe, a senior associate in the corporate and commercial practice at the firm. And with me today is Yemisi Awonuga, who is a partner and the co-head of our energy and projects practice. Today, we'll be talking about ESG investing, and we'll be focusing on the G, which is governance. Our goal in this series of conversations is to unpack the fundamentals of ESG investing, provide clarity on the priorities, including the governance priorities, as well as show how businesses can integrate these considerations into their businesses, their practices, their decision-making. I think my first question before we go into the meat of the conversation, and I'm sure yours as well, would be, what is ESG investing?
Thanks, Oyeyemi. You know, I love the nomenclature, ESG investing. I also love the depth of the concept. So what is ESG investing? It's an approach to managing assets where investors who are seeking to allocate their capital explicitly, and the keyword explicitly, incorporate into their investment decision making environmental, social, and governance consideration. What's the objective? It's to secure long-term return on their investment and to foster sustainable growth, because there is a correlation between good governance and long-term value creation.
It's been for a while, but it seems to have become really topical now. Why is that?
Well, interesting question. You know, as companies conduct businesses and seek to increase value and business opportunities, their eligibility is being measured by a completely different set of indices, unlike what we had before. I mean, once upon a time, environmental, social, and governance considerations were niche concerns of a select group of people that you would consider to be ethically and socially responsible. But things have changed. You now have a new set of investors who are evaluating, identifying, and pricing social, economic, and environmental risks. So unlike before, where you would say these are good to have, things have changed. When you're trying to access finance in today's world, the key indices go beyond the traditional considerations. And the way we see it from the trends, another few years, I mean, maybe a few years is even too...
The estimate is like 10,
10
years.
I think it's upon us now, right, to access finance, to seek business opportunities. Those key indices will go into the scorecard. So it's important for companies and boards of those companies, particularly in Nigeria, to reevaluate their systems, reevaluate their processes, and formulate plans that would ensure that they're able to integrate these considerations into their decision-making process. I mean, you'd agree with me, Oyeyemi, that it starts with governance, and it ends with governance.
Absolutely.
And the priorities of the people that are governing.
Yeah, maybe we should take a pause and just look at what these indices used to be. Traditionally, the governance indices or priorities would probably be shareholders' rights and preferences, executive pay, audit practices, independence, probably related party transactions, and maybe transparency increasingly. So now ESG is norm. Speaking from, just even looking at the trends, it's norm. And considering the correlation between long stakeholder value and good governance, what would you say, any board member or anyone listening should consider, what priorities should they be looking at now?
I'll leave you with two P's. People. If you're seeking to allocate your capital, I imagine that the first question would be, who is on your board?
Absolutely.
So a board must be set up to avoid the deficiencies of groupthink. There must be a deliberate and strategic attempt and effort to constitute a board that is multidisciplinary and is able to fully appreciate long-term business value creation in today's world. The material impact of the operations, the significance of systemic relationships, sustainability and stewardship. For instance, if you have a board that is completely unaware of the climate change concerns, then it's going to be almost difficult, almost unlikely for that kind of board to embrace even the most subtle ideas on environmental governance. And the converse is the case for a board that is, strategically diverse. Let's dig deeper. We have the Climate Change Act of Nigeria of 2021. There are mandatory provisions in there on that bind private companies. They're supposed to have an action plan for carbon emission reduction and to appoint a climate officer or sustainability officer. The likelihood of a board imbibing that culture will be determined, by the diversity of that board. Yeah. So again, I think the point is about repeopling your board, reviewing and evaluating the current traditional board to see whether you're ready to embrace the future.
And so second P?
Second P, process. Process is everything, right? If you have good processes, there would be accountability and transparency. So for a board to arrive at a fair, balanced, and understandable assessment of the company's position and prospect, you need policies and processes which underpin the framework, yes, and they must be transparent. The people that are implementing the policies must be accountable. If there is no transparency, then you really cannot be talking about accountability. The reporting lines must ensure accountability at every level. We all know that processes radically reshape strategy, and there's a direct correlation, between your result as a company and a good governance culture.
Clearly. I mean, we see what's happening even just recently. It's a governance issue. Yeah. I like the example you gave about climate change, and I'm just thinking, where is there a legal framework, one body of law where you can reference issues relating to ESG investing? And I mean, the laws that we have now contemplate it properly, or is it even robust? If there is it robust enough to accommodate all these things that you have highlighted?
Right, let me think. There's several pieces of legislation here and there that embody these principles. For instance, you have the Code of Corporate Governance of 2018, issued by the Financial Reporting Council, which adopts some of these principles. But I believe the snag is that, it wasn't done or framed with ESG investing in mind. So you have gaps. We can look at the PIA, that's the Petroleum Industry Act of 2021. Fantastic provisions on social and environmental considerations. However, there's almost nothing on governance, right? But when you compare that with the Climate Change Act, you have a governance requirement. So it goes beyond just saying you must ensure carbon emission reduction. It compels entities to appoint or designate an officer in an institution to see to that. And it's not just about naming Oyeyemi. It's about Oyeyemi going through certain type of certifications to be able to get to that level. So it's a governance requirement. So I think the point we're making is you have bits and pieces in different places, but do you have that framework that will ensure that ESG considerations become enforceable obligations? We're not there yet.
I guess the work is for everyone, both government and then businesses as well, because the intentionality is what will take us there, right? So I have a few other questions, but I think we should leave it for our environmental and social sessions. Let's just end this with recommendations for businesses. So as we're starting these conversations and making a priority, you said, and this is the point I think we should emphasize, it's no longer good to have. We're working towards a system that would enforce these obligations. So instead of waiting till then, there's some recommendations that companies can begin to consider now and make adjustments towards. What would they be?
That's a huge question, but I think I'll just focus on my own area of practice. That's
Exactly.
oil and gas.
Highly regulated. That's true. Highly regulated industries.
So I'll just focus on the oil and gas industry. And in doing that, I'm going to revisit people, repeopling your board for strategic diversity. Let's talk about energy transition, for instance. If you look around the globe and even Nigeria, you have the forward-thinking entities changing the name, and I imagine the processes from X E&P to X Energies.
Interesting.
Right? It takes a team of people who are diverse and ready to embrace and imbibe change to do that. So we should start from the basics. Repeople, upskill your board, because a certain level of dexterity is required to get us to that level where the E, which is environmental, the S, which is the social, and the G in ESG investing, can all be brought together under the same umbrella and becomes a culture within an institution.
Right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. This has been Talking Legal with Templars, and this brings us to the end of our first episode on ESG investing.